start in a couple of minutes.
So we are live now.
Great. You know, Paris, we mentioned to you just that we record the sessions, and we actually have them on a YouTube all access channel, and this is kind of our way to give back to the ecosystem in general. So we'll share the link for that with you, and we'll do nice thumbnail with the flyer, and have all the hashtags there as well.
Okay, great. The sound is good, right?
Very good.
Great.
I'm actually in the middle of facilitating our internal entrepreneurship and innovation entrepreneurship bootcamp. I call it the IE bootcamp, innovation entrepreneurship. And they're on break now today. We're forming the teams, so I will have to jump off after around 10 minutes, but I will definitely watch the recording and re-engage with you in due time, Paris.
Perfect. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, I think we can start.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Core at HTU's Masterclass series. We are thrilled, delighted, and honored to have Paris Delatraz here with us today. You will get to know him shortly. Just to give you some context, Paris is the managing director of IE Venture Labs at IE Business School, and he's been on all sides of the business equation, right? So from fundraising to actually starting companies, to selling off companies, and he does that through his group, Amazing Lab. He is very well traveled and is really keen on understanding the ecosystem within the region. He is part of Rise Up Egypt. He is engaging with multiple institutes and entities in Saudi, both governmental and non-governmental, advising them on strategic directions with regard to ecosystem building. He will be visiting actually the region sometime soon, and we would love to host you when you are here, Paris. Without further ado, I will leave the floor to Paris. Thank you all for being here. And Paris, my friend, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the kind words. It's a real pleasure to be here. As many of you might know, those of you that know me, I'm a big fan of the Middle East, big fan of the Arab people, of the culture. I just came back from 2 days ago. I just came back from Saudi. Lots of things going on all over the region, and I'll be at Rise Up later this at the end of November. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here, and it's also great to be here to talk about bootstrapping, because bootstrapping is very much dear to my heart, and I think it's fundamental to the entrepreneur mindset, because as I will try to explain to you, bootstrapping is not just for entrepreneurship. You know, bootstrapping is a way of life. It's a way of living, and I've been practicing it all my life. And I've always felt that, you know, when you bootstrap, you appreciate things better, more, you know, much more. And so this, these slides I'm going to show you, and a lot of the content that we'll be talking about today, are part of a course given by Jeff Char at our school, at IE Business School. He's a close buddy of mine, and we've worked together on teaching this course often. But I have to admit that most of these slides are his, and he is an expert in bootstrapping. And I'm sure that those of you that might have gone to IE might have taken his course. But he's a good friend, and he's a VC accelerator guy based in Japan. He's American, but he's based in Japan, and he teaches at IE a course on bootstrapping. So let's begin. I want this to be dynamic, so please feel free to ask questions. I'll be looking at the chat often to see if anybody's got something to say. Although if you want to say something live, all the better. Okay. So what is bootstrap? Building a business out of very little or virtually nothing. I mean, those of you that have read The Lean Startup probably remember Eric Ries's line there where he says, the definition of a startup is where you have limited resources and you're operating in conditions of extreme uncertainty. So let me ask you guys, what does an entrepreneur see in uncertainty? Anybody want to give a shot at that on the chat? What does an entrepreneur see in uncertainty? Opportunity, exactly. And a lot of people, wonder, especially foreigners, they come to the Middle East, and I was in a big company in Saudi Arabia last week, and they had the 10 top executives of the company there, and I was with a colleague from the US, and he said, why is it that of the 10 top executives of this Saudi company, 4 are Lebanese, 2 are Palestinian, 1 is Syrian, the other one's Egyptian, and the rest are Saudis? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the Lebanese and the Palestinians and many other people in the Middle East of the type are used to living under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And they're used to excelling in those conditions. And that's why you see so many of them all over the Middle East, because they see opportunity where a lot of the locals see fear. And this is the same in many parts of the world. You take the United States, if you took the top 10 Hispanic executives, Spanish-speaking executives, 8 of them come from one country. No, it's not Mexico. It's not Spain. It's Cuba. And why is that? Because Cubans arrived on the boat in 1958 after the revolution as refugees, and they've had to learn to excel. And so this mindset of learning to excel under conditions of uncertainty, of learning to prove yourself, in a foreign country or whatever, is unique, and it's very entrepreneurial, and it's something that you take with you for the rest of your life. And I think with that mentality of dealing with entrepreneurship and always seeing opportunity in entrepreneurship, that's very close to related to bootstrapping, because it's about building something from virtually nothing. And bootstrapping is applicable not just for startups. You can bootstrap your life. You can bootstrap your contact base. If you arrive in a foreign country, you can bootstrap your way to becoming somebody powerful. And that's really unique. And that, so I want you to think about bootstrapping as, much more than just a startup situation. So bootstrappers rely usually on personal income and savings, sweat equity, lowest possible operating costs, fast inventory turnaround, and a cash-only approach to selling. Yes, bootstrapping is about very limited resources and doing what you can with those resources. And like I said, this is not just about startups. I'll give you an example. When I was an investment banker for 21 years. And 8 of those, my first 8 were in New York. And then I was sent to Switzerland by Union Bank of Switzerland to start the Southern Europe department. I was in charge of Italy, France, and Spain. And so this was in 1988. Yeah, most of you weren't born there. But in 1988, I arrived in Zurich and I was in charge of Southern Europe. And my boss said to me, here's your budget. And here's what we expect you to do by the end of the year. Hopefully you can generate this much money. And so I was used to, the life of luxury in New York because that's what the bank gave you in New York. And those were the 80s. Remember Liar's Poker and all that stuff? Well, those were the 80s in New York. And I was there in the middle of all that. And then I arrived in Switzerland and I was responsible for opening up Southern Europe. And so, you know what I did? I took the train to Spain and I took the train to Paris and I operated bootstrapping. And sure enough, I was taking the first year, I took the train everywhere and I generated quite a bit of business. But then at the end of the year, when my review was coming up, my boss said to me, so Paris, let's look at your review. You have generated about $500,000 in revenue for the bank, and you have spent $62,000 in expenses, mainly taking the train all over Southern Europe. And he said to me, if you had taken the plane instead of the train, would it have made such a big difference? No. I would have spent 100,000 instead of 62,000 maybe. So, and I tell you this story because bootstrapping is important, but you need to know when to bootstrap. Bootstrapping isn't for every situation. And you need to see the forest behind the trees here in the sense of bootstrapping. You need to see what are you trying to do? And there's a time to bootstrap in a company and there's a time not to bootstrap. Just like there's a time to bootstrap in your career and a time not to bootstrap. I felt it was important to prove myself to bootstrap in that situation, but clearly it wouldn't have made a big difference. But it was my mentality. And I have that mentality even today. Believe it or not, when a client sends me to a 5-star hotel, I look around and I say to myself, do I need to be in this 5-star hotel? Wouldn't I be fine in a 4-star? It becomes a mentality. When I'm here in Madrid and I have to go somewhere, the first thing I think about is, can I walk or can I take the bus? And if I can't, then I'll take a taxi. Now, can I afford to take taxis? Of course I can afford to take taxis. But it's this mentality of, if you don't need to spend it, why spend it? And that's a particular mentality that when you're a refugee or when you're someone that's been living under conditions of uncertainty, you carry with you. And that's why you excel so much. And you also carry it with you when you've been trained that way or you come from a country where there's that particular way of thinking. I was raised in the United States and, my father, he had me, every day he would tell me, you got to work as if this was the last day of your job. It's not what the company can do for you, but what you can do for your company. And so I've got that healthy paranoia that keeps me on my toes. But you know what? If you don't have that healthy paranoia, you're not alive. Rezek knows that I have a sign in my office that says, good morning, let the stress begin.
Yeah, I do.
Without a little bit of stress, you're not alive. So, yeah, bootstrapping is not just a methodology. It's a way of living. It's a mentality. Bootstrappers find freedom early by building an enterprise that customers want so much that they become the source of funding. So what does that mean? It means that your customer is funding you. And that's an amazing feeling when your customer is funding you because you have freedom. Now, most of you that have done startups before, you know that one of the nastiest things is the shareholder agreement, right? And that's when you realize that, hey, I'm not an entrepreneur that can just do anything. As soon as I start receiving funding, your hands are tied. But it's true. As soon as you start receiving funding, you can do a lot more with your company. But that's not always the case. And I'll give you an example. There's a gentleman in our school who is a very famous Lebanese entrepreneur. His name is Nadim Taleb. They call him Ned Taleb. He's the cousin of Mr. Taleb that wrote The Black Swan. And this gentleman has built almost 2 unicorns entirely by bootstrapping. 2 companies with revenues in the hundreds of millions in the United States. He's never borrowed a cent from anybody. And he always says something I like a lot. He says, when you're an entrepreneur, do you want to be rich or do you want to be famous? Because those guys that raise money and they own 2% of maybe Uber or something like that, they're famous. But the guy that nobody's ever heard of and owns still 100% or 80% of his big private company, he's rich. So do you want to be rich or do you want to be famous? Bootstrapping is freedom via service, finding ways to connect and lead and serve customers so well that they can't imagine it without you. You want to get to the point where your customers have real loyalty with you. So we got a comment here from the audience. Disruption, risk, taking people and organizations out of their comfort zone. When people get out of their comfort zone, they become better. Talal, I totally agree with that. Some of you might know that my research is around emotional intelligence and the comfort zone. We have even an assessment that I'm be happy to share at some point with your organization, where we measure people's comfort with uncertainty. And one of the things that's really interesting about this is that the bigger your comfort zone professionally, for 80% of the people, the bigger your comfort zone professionally, the smaller it is in your personal life. What does that mean? It means that if you love uncertainty in your work, if you thrive in it, you probably don't like it in your personal life. Because what are we looking for in our lives? A balance. You can't see it right now because the camera's facing the other way, but this is my home office and I travel about 30% of the time sometimes, or 20%, about a week a month. And when I travel, when I come back, the last thing I want to do is go out. I want to hang out on my lazy boy. I want to turn on Netflix and just relax. I don't like a lot of uncertainty in my personal life, but that's what makes me, so crazy in my professional life. And that's how 80% of the people are. We've done a lot of research, and we've researched this with professors from UC Berkeley, Stanford, and IE Business School. And that's what we found over 10 years of research and talking and surveying over 20,000 people, that 80% of the people, like Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, even Richard Branson, they love uncertainty professionally. They're nerds in their personal life. And this is a very important message, people, because a lot of us growing up, if you're a little bit nerdy, they look at you and they say, oh, you're never going to be a leader. You're going to be an engineer or a mathematician or an auditor. No way. If you're a little bit nerdy, you've got better chances of going crazy in your personal life. Sorry, in your professional life. And so bootstrapping is a sense of freedom. It's a way of freedom. So who should bootstrap? Well, many of today's largest corporations started as bootstrapping. I mean, look, remember Apple? Steve Jobs. How long did it take Steve Jobs to get his first funding? 2 years. And some of us complain because we're like going crazy because for 6 months we can't find investors. It took Steve Jobs 2 years. And both of these, Apple and Microsoft, began as bootstrapped ventures. most of the world's startups will follow this road. And it's either because there's no alternative or because of the unmatched control and independence it offers. So think about that. No alternative means you can't find anybody else to give you the money. So that's one reason why some people bootstrap. The other reason is because of the freedom it gives you. And I think that's the main reason for most people. Now, what's another reason for bootstrapping? If you bootstrap your venture, what's the other good reason for doing this? Feel free to tell me in the chat. Think about it. You bootstrap, you get your customers to start giving you revenue. What's going to change in your company? You have control over your decisions, but there's another big reason. Think about it. Feeds motivation, yeah, but there's another big one. Think about it. One that affects the investor to your benefit. Increase the customer base. And what does that do? Your value, Khalid. Mabruk, Khalid. Mabruk. Yes, fulus. You get more fulus if you bootstrap. The valuation goes up. And that's a very important reason, people, because if you bootstrap and you start getting revenue, your valuation goes up substantially. And so when you get investment, you're diluted less. All right, the art of bootstrapping. Some 10 rules here. Focus on cash flow, not profitability. Okay, I know you've all heard that a lot. Forecast from the bottom up. Start at the bottom in terms of forecast. Ship, then test. I mean, this is a big one. Let's start to experiment. This is what the lean startup's all about. Get out there, make sure you're not affecting your reputation, but start shipping to groups of people that you think can validate what's going on here very quickly. I wouldn't suggest you ship all over the world, but start shipping with smaller groups. Forget the proven team. You prove people as you go. As long as you think you've got the right mindset in your people. Start as a service business. This is critical. You got to build relationships with your customers. Focus on function, not form. Pick your battles. Don't fight everything. Understaff. Make sure you've got, not just a bunch of fixed costs, but variable fixed, where you grow when you need to. Go direct, forget about intermediaries, and position yourself against the leader in the pack. Now, a lot of people always thinking, well, I need venture capital. Venture capital is like rocket fuel. If you're going to use venture capital, make sure you're flying a rocket. And I've spent a lot of time in the past. Actually, I've spent quite a bit of time in Amman in the past. I was spending time there with Oasis 500, looking at lots of the deals there. I was spending the time there with Silicon Badia. You guys have great, we even had Gaza Geeks. I suppose they're still around, right? They were coming to Amman and we were looking at the deals. It was amazing to see some of the deals there. And, I remember a lot of the times people saying, yeah, I need to get ready for venture capital. You got to realize that there's a time and place for everything. And that's why you need to have a bootstrapping mentality, because if you have a bootstrapping mentality, you're going to start with your own money Then you're going to go probably to angel investors, and then you're going to go to venture capital. It's going slowly and realizing that every time you take a little bit of money, that should spearhead your growth. Because if it's not, then keep growing bootstrap. But this is about having a lean mentality. And then at one point, you're going to say, okay, I'm done. Now I'm ready for the big bucks. OPM, those beautiful 3 letters that you wake up in the morning and you think you've made it. OPM. No, it's not opium. It's other people's money. When you're working with other people's money, make sure that you've got scale, because that's when you can really scale. So, as I said, raise money after you have traction. Focus on the problem. Find out what is a major problem out there. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. But when I look, when I talk to my students, I'm like, listen, when I look at your projects, I have to ask myself, is this an aspirin or a painkiller? Because if you are selling aspirins, forget it. You got to be selling painkillers. So the problem that you're fixing has got to be big. If you're helping people who have headaches, that's not going to go anywhere. You got to fix, you have to help people that they have a tumor in their head and they need like something really serious, and you're the only place in town to solve that problem. Let's see here, Mohammed. I was part of AMAC, Arab Mobile App Competition. It was the event that got us started in Mine Rockets. It was my partnership with Mahmoud. Has no idea about this, but we won MADA's Accessibility Award back then. Got a new laptop and some software with the money. Bootstrap for a couple of years. I remember Rami Al-Karmi was part of hosting that in Zain back then. That's right. Back then, what year was that, Mohammed? I was running the biggest mobile app competition in the world and the biggest in the Middle East. And I remember that in Jordan, 2013, yeah. In Jordan, it was Zain that was helping to run it. And my buddy at the time, Mr. Abu Karim, the CEO of Zain. And I hope he's watching this, because I hear that Mr. Abu Karim is now a very important man in Jordan. I have to look him up. He's a great guy. Such a vision, such integrity. I really respect Abu Karim. And yeah, I gotta look him up and go see him next time I'm in town, because he's Minister of Telecommunications, right? Great. Well, it was great working.
Now they call it Ministry of Digital Economy and Entrepreneurship. He's the minister.
Oh my God. Well, I definitely need to go back then. Because we spent 2 good years working with Zain, not just with the mobile app competition, but we instilled a culture of innovation for a couple of years where we had internal competitions at Zain. Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Mohammed, for reminding me of that. All right, so back to the problem, guys. What is the major problem here that we're solving? And who has it? Okay, you can't be like solving everybody's problem, because then nobody really cares about you. And you need to talk to other people who may have the same problem. Now, a lot of people start with the solution, but the reality is that, this is how many people make mistakes. They start with a solution and then they try to find customers. You need to validate the problem first, and you need to find a problem that's big. And I'm going to show you, as I said, an example of that a little later. So pick your market first. Figure out some massive problem experienced by a large portion of that market. Find out what makes that target market similar and what is driving them nuts. And let their needs drive your product decisions. So what does that mean? Essentially, it means that we're not operating in a vacuum here. Bootstrapping is not just a mentality about using your own money to get traction, but it's a mentality about being modest and having humility and looking around you and saying, I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to build the product that I think is the right product and let people come. Let's go out there, let's validate this, and let's their needs drive our product decisions. And now you need to focus on the problem. The easiest kind of customer development is the kind that you do before you have a very solid product idea. What does that mean? Well, essentially it means don't spend a lot of time developing a product before you spend time trying to figure out who your customers are. And do a lot of customer development. Do a lot of focus groups. Do a lot of surveys, and do what we call the manual simulation. And Rezek, you probably remember manual simulation from the Venture Lab. Let me give you an idea what manual simulation is. One of the things that students and young entrepreneurs have a hard time accepting is that 90% of the innovation today is a copy or an improvement of something that already exists. Now, in a culture where people are very proud, that's not easy to swallow, right? How many of us want to admit that we're copying something, or we're just copying it and improving it? Not too many. But the reality, people, is that that's what an investor wants. If I'm an investor, I don't want you to tell me I'm going to do something that's never been done before. Imagine, I'm going to say, not with my money. I want you to tell me, you see this? This is a problem that exists in Brazil. And they built this app, right? They built this app to solve that problem. And they not only solved it, but they got investors to pour $10 million into this app. And I want to bring this app to Jordan. And I'm going to make a few little changes to it just so that it, localize it to the local culture. That's what I want to hear as an investor. And so it's very important that you spend more time thinking about what the needs are out there. Now, let me give you an example of manual simulation, because this is a key part of bootstrapping. In the Venture Lab, about 3 years ago, we had a startup in my class, in my core class, same class that Rezek took, because at IE Business School, we're probably one of the few business schools that we force students to take a lot of entrepreneurship classes. And in one of the classes, there were these 3 students, and they decided they wanted to do a startup idea because they wanted to change in their professional life. I think some of them were consultants, whatever. And so they were looking around for ideas, and finally they found an idea in the States called Talkspace. Talkspace is an app for people with depression and anxiety. We got nobody here with depression and anxiety, do we? No, not us. We're positive thinkers. But
I guess 100% of us are anxious, more or less, or of the founders at least.
Yeah, right. But that's good. And as I was saying earlier, you got to have some stress in your life. I got a sign in my room, in my office, that says, "Good morning, let the stress begin." I mean, without stress, we're not alive. So founders need to have this, what I call healthy paranoia. Otherwise, you're not alive. And so these guys, they copied this idea called Talkspace. And it's for an app that helps people with anxiety and depression. And it gives you therapy through the app by messaging, like what's up. That's how it gives you therapy. So they copy the idea. They copy the idea and they bring it to Spain. They say, we're going to bring this idea to Spain. This is their project. And so I always tell my students, what's the #1 validation for an idea? The #1 validation is that it already exists. Because when you're presenting it to an investor, he or she can't say to you, "Oh, that'll never work." never work? Listen, this thing was done in Brazil and they funded it for $11 million. So that's the number one validation, that it exists somewhere else. The second validation, so they copied the idea, it already existed. Perfect. Second validation is they did surveys. So they were trying to figure out, because this startup, Talkspace, started in New York. They were trying to figure out, are there as many people suffering from anxiety and depression in Spain as there are in New York? And sure enough, there was, or more. And so they did the survey, they got back the validation. Yes, they needed this here too. They did focus groups, more validation. And then finally, it's manual simulation, which essentially is bootstrap your way into a prototype. Create a prototype by bootstrapping that allows you to prove that this thing works. And so what did they do? They bought 20 cheap Nokia phones and they gave 10 to students that needed therapy and that had anxiety problems. And they gave 10 to psychiatrists, which was the business model. And then they connected these psychiatrists with the 10 students. And for 2 weeks, the psychiatrist gave therapy to the students. After 2 weeks, over 80% of the students said this was amazing. And 90% of the psychiatrists said, this is a great way to make extra money. I could give therapy while I'm on the bus. And so they were able to prove that this thing worked by creating a prototype. Yeah, you could call it that. They bootstrapped their way into showing that it worked by creating a very simple manual simulation of the real thing. Well, they made it to Venture Day, and I think they won Venture Day. They were a big success. Well, that company, it's called iFeel now in Spain. They've raised last month 6 million euros. They probably have a valuation north of 20. 3 years later, big success. So why am I telling you this? Because bootstrapping is not just about creating your company and running it lean. You will use bootstrapping also to validate. You need to find a way to validate without spending a lot of money. And sometimes it's going to be very challenging because you need to spend money on prototypes and technology and the like, but you need to find a way to show an investor that it's not just a good team and a PowerPoint, that you've actually got traction. And often to develop that traction, you're going to need to bootstrap. Focus on the customer's problem. Remember, it's the customer that pays you. He or she is the user. All right, scarcity is an advantage. Here's another strategy. So why do innovators love constraints? Fewer resources produce proximity. Proximity drives innovation. Think about that. When you've got fewer resources, you have to hang out together in your team. You're more productive. You interact more. You have meaningful bonds. You collaborate more. You innovate more. But this, people, is not just about startups. Who do you think has more meaningful bonding? The family that is poor and everybody shows up for dinner every night and they look at what they have on their plate and they thank God every day for the food on their plate? Or the family of the billionaire family where the father is who knows where doing a deal, the mother is who knows where doing whatever, and the kids barely have a reason to show up for the meal. Scarcity is important sometimes. It makes us focus. It makes us understand better why we're doing what we're doing. And it creates this teamwork that you cannot replace by throwing money at it. So that's the first thing. You can drive innovation through scarcity. The second thing you can drive is faster feedback. You can become more agile by having constraints. You're going to be, by being resource constraints, there's a willingness to work with the limitations that you have in order to get an idea off the ground. And finally, constraints can also be an indispensable tool of creation. You know, if you don't have constraints, I mean, I've seen this so many times. You know, why is it that often innovation is stifled inside big companies? Because they throw money at the problem. Now, obviously, if you're doing R&D, like a pharmaceutical, you need that. But when you're looking at trying to be innovative, trying to solve problems, and you just throw money at them, it's a challenge to be innovative. So what do these products have in common? Think about it. What do these products have in common? Healthcare. Oh, I don't know about the last one there. That soup powder looks pretty nasty to me. I don't know if I would eat that stuff. But yeah, two of them have a little bit of healthcare, you could say. What else? What else do they have in common? They all have customers that consume it, yes. And what kind of customers do they have?
Niche, probably. Targeted segment, not for the mass.
Okay, a niche segment. Wellness. Yeah, wellness, maybe there's an element of wellness. Again, I don't know if this soup is one of these cheapo soups or practical. But what can you say about these markets, the markets of these products? Wide, yes, they're big markets, right? These are big markets for both these three products. They can be very big. They can multiply. These products can multiply in a big way. So why every startup should bootstrap? Okay, so what are the main reasons for bootstrapping? It helps you stay scrappy and to realize talents you may have not had before. Let's think about that. Why would bootstrapping help you discover talents? Think about that for a minute. Why do you think bootstrapping might help us discover talents? Think about it. If you're a small team, you got 5 people on your team, and you don't have enough money to hire more, you have to wear many hats. Exactly, Mohammed. Resource utilization. Yes, Mutasa. So when you have to wear many hats, you might discover talents you didn't have before, and especially in your team. It can help attract the right people who are willing to bet on themselves. That's the other thing. If you have a lot of money, you're going to maybe attract people that are going to join you for the money. Yep, you can dig deep into your capacity. So when you're bootstrapping, you're going to attract the real people that are committed. You know? You know what the difference is between being committed and being involved in a project? I'll tell you, in the West, this is our Western version. I'll give you the Arab version in a minute. But in the West, I like to say that the difference between being involved and being committed is like when you're having scrambled eggs with bacon in the morning. The chicken is involved. The pig is fully committed. So imagine you're having scrambled eggs with lamb in the morning. The Arab version of this. So yeah, we want pigs, we want lambs, we want people that are committed. And if you've got a lot of money, it's hard to tell why they're there. You know, you want people that believe in the team. Number 3, it helps you maintain control of your company while finding the right partners to help you scale. This is critical, people, because if you start giving out shares to the wrong people or start selling shares to the wrong people, it's a problem. Give yourself time. You need to give yourself time to the point where you know when you're ready to scale and you know what partners you want. Okay, why raising too much money can harm your startup. Number 1, you will spend what you raise in the same time frames. Think about it. I'm going to lower this window here because the sun is starting to come out here in Madrid. We started fairly early, but now it's almost 9:45 here. So think about it. When you raise money, you're going to spend it at the same time, whether you raise $1 million or $4 million. You're raising money for the next 6 months. You're not keeping that money for 2 years. So what's happening here is that you're going to spend it more quickly. I always raise the minimal amount of money that I need. But again, you got to be careful with this, because if you raise too little money at the right time, it could affect your growth. You need to figure out when is the time to really go after OPM and raise big. But at that point, you should have already had a lot of traction and you should have already had a great team around you. When and how much you raise determines the valuation. The larger the round, the higher the price, the harder the next hurdle is going to be to hit. So again, you need to think bootstrapping when you're raising money as well. So the fundamentals. What do you need to get going? You need the name of your company. You need to register the domain. You got to hire a lawyer, figure out where you want to set up the company, and be realistic about your IP. What are you actually protecting? Copyrights, trademarks, patents, trade secrets. But, a lot of people get hung up on, oh, I got to protect this. There are certain things you can protect, but most things you won't be able to. And make sure that you have an accountant, somebody good at doing the numbers. Too many times, this is a big mistake. You need to think big. Create an advisory board, insiders and outsiders, people that you can rely on to give you real solid advice, mentors and the like. Okay. All right. I'm going to change presentations now and open this up to questions. I'm going to go to another presentation. Any questions so far?
Guys, feel free if you want to ask questions.
Question?
Jump in.
Yes.
I just want to ask you, how should we know the proper time and the proper amount for funding to make it not more and not less? As you said, it's critical in amount and it's critical in time. More funds means maybe you will spend unwisely. Less funds needs a kind of limitation for your growth. So what is your highlights for this particular?
So I think the right time is when you see that your customers, it's that moment in time when you've got you've rolled out your product or some version of your product, and you see that your customers are demanding it in big numbers. If you see that the only thing stopping you from selling is more resources, at that moment in time, let's say you produce 100 of your product and you try to sell it, and all 100 are sold immediately, and you realize that the only thing stopping you between selling more of that is having more money, or providing more service is having more money. That's the time that you need to do a big raise. Now, it's not easy, I know, to figure out when that moment is, but it surely isn't at the beginning, and it surely isn't while you're still validating the product.
So it's usually after you go to the market and after you see the real, let's say, feedback of the sales, right?
Yes. Now, obviously, that depends on your product. Some of you might have products where you need the funding. If you're trying to develop a Lebanese fast food chain, that's going to take money. You're going to have to create the first restaurant, and so there it's a different story than if you're using an app or you're doing some other kind of service. If it's a high capital investment startup like a fast food chain, then obviously you need to be looking at other things.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So can you see one slide here, or do you see many?
Just one slide. Best strategy.
Okay, great. All right. So before I would talk about the example that I wanted to give of a startup idea, I want to go more into raising money, raising your seed round in your home country. And these are the four things that I usually recommend. First is, you got to have a pitch, and you got to practice your pitch. You got to build relationships. You got to network, and then maybe you might want to join an accelerator locally. Okay, so let's start up. So how do I find my startup? And why not just, how do I fund my startup? Why not just go to Silicon Valley and raise a large round of venture funding? A lot of people ask themselves this. They say, well, I can't raise any money in my country. I should go to Silicon Valley. Let me tell you, it's a lot easier to raise money in your country than to go to Silicon Valley. Your chances of raising money from US investors is very low. Now, once you have a company that is like scaling and is like really got potential, they're going to ask you to move to Silicon Valley probably. And then you'll get the real money. But initially, in the first stages, the first initial stages of your startup, it is a lot easier. And I know it from my experience also here in Spain. It is so much easier for a startup in the initial stages to raise money here than it is in the US. Why? Well, investors work in pattern recognition mode. And what do I mean by that? When they see a European entrepreneur or a Middle Eastern entrepreneur in the Valley, the pattern doesn't look too good. And what do I mean by that? They worry about a lot of things, investors. Educational background, work experience, connections, visa issues, and they have a hard time relating to a lot of these entrepreneurs. And at the end of the day, remember, investors are looking for a quick buck because the success rate of startups is very low. And so when they invest in a startup, they need to be thinking, this is going to make a lot of money for me because it's going to make up for all the other ones that are going to lose money. And so the smaller your ticket, the less interest they have. The smaller your traction, the less interest they have. They want to see you when you want big numbers of money and you have lots of traction. And that's what you see in the Silicon Valley right now. Valuations there are usually 50% to 100% higher than they are here in Spain. So I suppose they'd be similar. I mean, although the Middle East is very different. I've seen some valuations in Kuwait that are crazy. And so I think that valuations in Amman are probably very different to Riyadh and Kuwait. And the same thing happens in, now, are those realistic, those valuations in Kuwait and Riyadh? Maybe, maybe not. But at the end of the day, it's the law of supply and demand. There's a lot of money now in Kuwait and in Saudi chasing very few deals. And so put yourself in the investor's shoes. Would you invest in a foreigner that arrived in your country and you didn't know how long they were going to stay there and their deal was very small? I mean, you'd rather invest in a small deal of somebody that you know, or that at least you can try to know. But there's another thing that's very important about Silicon Valley that doesn't make it interesting in the VC area. When you look at VCs in the Middle East and in Europe, where do you think the people that work in these VCs, where do you think they came from? What job do you think they had before they were VC partners?
They say the best investors are entrepreneurs. So people who found businesses or failed at businesses. So,
Right.
Yeah.
That's not what they are in the Middle East or Europe.
Yeah.
When you look at some of these funds in the Middle East and Europe, these guys are ex-bankers.
Yes. Investment bankers usually. Yeah.
Ex-investment bankers, yeah. And so in Silicon Valley, almost all of them are ex-entrepreneurs. And so it's a different mentality. And that's why Silicon Valley is a great place, but later in your development cycle, when you're trying to raise the real money at a high valuation, that's when Silicon Valley makes sense. You know, it's all about the network, people. It's all about the network. Reference checks. How can they, know you? There's no mutual connections with the investors. So there's no credible references unless you're lucky and they know somebody you know. You don't have a network. So how are you going to hire the best people in the Valley for your team? And fundraising will also be difficult because you won't have a network to fund from. And so, again, the best strategy is practice your pitch, build relationships around you, network as much as you can, and start by raising money in your home country, because that's the best reference. And maybe join an accelerator so you can get more traction. Okay, now I'm going to go to the final presentation here. You see one slide? Okay.
Yeah, but it's not in presentation mode.
Now?
Yeah.
One slide? Okay. All right, any questions from the last deck? No? All right, let's keep going then. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example of a project that was in the Venture Lab. And it's an example of bootstrapping, but it's also an example of a pitch, okay? And in my book, this is like a really, really good pitch because it's an example of how after very few slides, this person was able to get funding, okay? So let's begin. So the problem, what is the problem? So meet Buddy. Buddy is a dog. He's my dog. So you tell a story. And as probably most of you know, investors love hearing a story because essentially it tells the investor, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, how, the level of commitment that you have, the why. The thing that Simon Sinek says all the time. People are not interested in what you do or how you do it, but why you're doing what you're doing. And so meet Buddy. He's my dog. That's how this guy started the pitch. And I love Buddy. And me and my wife, we love Buddy so much that we give Buddy candies all the time. Now, what do you think is going to happen? Well, Buddy is going to get fat, right? So far, it looks like it looks like a childish presentation, very childish. But wait, be patient. So Buddy gets fat. Who cares? Nobody cares, especially investors. But did you know that there are 150 million dogs in the US and Europe and owned by dog owners? And did you know that 60% of those dogs are obese, overweight? And did you know that if a dog is obese, they live 2 to 3 years less? They have emotional distress, and their medical costs are 50% higher. So let me ask you, if you're an investor and you see this slide, what are you thinking?
There is money
Business
here.
opportunity.
Yeah.
You're thinking fulus, fulus. I can smell the fulus in the air, right? I can see it on the street. This is an enormous opportunity. I mean, what do we know about people with dogs? They're crazy about their dogs, right?
They spend much for their pets.
Imagine if you tell someone with a dog, do you want your dog to live 2 to 3 years more? They'll cut their arm so that their dog lives 2 to 3 years more and not have emotional distress. And so when we saw the investors, when this presentation was given, I could see the investors like, oh my God. This was in 2013, I think it was. Oh my God, the investors are like, this is amazing. I can see the problem here. It's enormous. And is this a painkiller that these people are looking for or an aspirin? It's a painkiller. A real painkiller. And so what's the solution? It's an app where you put a sensor on the dog's collar, and then you put the age, breed, and weight of the dog. And every night when you get home, you point the app at Buddy, and you can see that Buddy did nothing for 22 hours. Lying around the house. And then for an hour, he walked around a little bit. And then for half an hour, you walked him. So who's responsible for Buddy being obese? You are. Imagine that. On top of this enormous problem, I'm going to make you feel guilty on top of that. And so by now you've got your wallet and you're saying, okay, how much do I need to pay? At this point, the investor said, here's $50,000. I'm in. Now, what happened? When the student came up with this idea a long time ago, so many years ago, this market for this Fitbit for dogs was a $20 million market in the world. Today, it's a $500 million market. What did this young man do with the $50,000? He did not quit his full-time job, and he decided to do it on the side. So what do you think happened? Mafia, nothing. So yeah, that's another lesson here. If you're serious, you know, and I know that every Arab at night is an entrepreneur. Every Arab I've met is a dreamer at night thinking, you know, one of these days I'm going to walk into my office and I'm going to say, khalas, yalla, you know, it's time to do something different. And yeah, But if you're going to do that, you're not going to be able to keep your jobs. At some point, you need to jump in the pool, because that's the only way to succeed. And so this is an example of how you need to do a pitch. You need to provide a pitch that immediately gets the attention that this is a very big problem. And then a simple solution. A simple solution. And what did he do? He bootstrapped. He figured out what the specifications were. He got someone in China to manufacture him the sensor, and he developed the app. He bootstrapped and he started going out there. And you know, the market's enormous, growth segment, all these things. But yeah, at the end of the day, he failed. And why did he fail? Because you got to be full-time when you're doing these things. But here's a great example of, you know, he bootstrapped, he started selling because it didn't take a lot of money. But he was still trying to do it on the side because he didn't want to take the risk of giving up his job. Okay. I'm looking for my cursor here. So any questions on this? On any of the things that we discussed?
Dedication is a must for such scenarios, right, Paris? You need to dedicate, you need to believe in your idea so it can work, regardless how potential you can see and how big the market is. If you don't believe and dedicate yourself and your efforts for your idea, it won't work, right?
Yes. No, dedication is a must. Commitment. It goes back to what I said earlier. You can't just be involved in these things. You've got to be committed. You know, you really have to be committed. And so I think that, yeah, you really have to, and it's hard nowadays because there's so many other things that make it attractive to try to, you know, mitigate the risk of starting your own startup, but by, you know, doing it on the side.
And Paris, I always tell our incubated entities and startups that when investors know that you have a couple of things on your plate, even if you have the most amazing product / idea, they will lose interest immediately.
Yes, yes, totally. It's like, you know, when you're trying to get a job at a company and, you know, they think you're too entrepreneurial, they know that you're not going to last long there. I've always had trouble with interviews because at the end of the interview, the guy was like, I don't think you're going to stay here very long. And he was right. But I didn't take those jobs. But I stayed for many years in my jobs. I was only at 2 banks in my investment banking career, UBS and ABN AMRO. And then I spent, 8 years as an entrepreneur with 5 startups of my own. And then now I've been at IE Business School for 12 years. So I stuck, and what is the secret to staying in a job? To feel inspired and to feel like you like what you're doing. I always say that there are 2 types of people in the world: Friday people and Monday people. Friday people hate what they do all week. They're looking for the weekend. And Monday people, they love what they do. I've always been a Monday person. And that's why entrepreneurs are usually Monday people. I mean, if you don't like what you're doing as an entrepreneur and you're looking for the weekend to come, forget it. You're in the wrong startup. I think we have a question here from Jalal.
No, just I have a big like for the Monday and Friday people.
Great. I suppose, Jalal, you're a Monday person, right?
Definitely 100%. Yeah.
And worth mentioning, Paris, that Dr. Jalal is one of the few people who is actually bootstrapping and doing well. So I don't know if you can, Dr. Jalal, give like a quick 30 seconds pitch on what you do and how you're bootstrapping and doing well.
Yeah, thank you, Rizek. So we are building a low-code, no-code platform that we believe that we have an edge of generating code in all technologies, and we can support any technology in less than 1 day today. I have so far bootstrapped from my own money around 150 USD. And I think we are shooting for a good traction before going with the first investment round.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
no code is big nowadays.
We believe so, yeah. We believe so.
Good. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you, Paris. Thank you.
Okay, Paris,
Any-
on another note, I have myself a question, and we probably know what an investable startup looks like. But if you want to define what is investable startup in a couple of words, like and just what comes to your mind, what is on the top of your mind, and I know that having a clear problem, having the market, and all the basics are crucial. But what do you think the deal breaker for you as an investor, because you invest yourself? And what would be an ultimate irresistible startup to invest at?
An amazing team.
And what an amazing team looks like?
An amazing team looks like a team that they have tremendous chemistry between the team. They have tremendous initiative. They're Monday people that love what they do together. And that that they're going to, eventually they're going to find the right problem to go after. Let me give you an example of that. We had some students that many years ago got funded by the Kuwait Investment Office, KIO. And they decided, after they received a couple of $1 million from them, like 2 months later, they decided to pivot their idea. And so they wanted to give the money back to them. And the KIO said, we invested in you guys. Keep the money. We're sure that this new idea is going to work. And it did. So, people is critical here. People is critical. I had another situation, a student of mine, he raised money for an idea. The investors gave him $1.5 million. And then after 2 or 3 years, he lost all their money. The idea failed. And then he started a new idea. Guess who his investors were? The same guys. And some people said, that's crazy. Why? I mean, how can they be so stupid? They're not stupid. This guy now is going to work harder for their money and going to feel even more guilty losing it. You invest in people. The rest of the stuff is easy. You can, if you just follow the rules, it's not hard.
Yeah. And on another note, Paris, we know for a fact that bootstrapping is not something easy. It's easier said than done. And as you mentioned earlier in your presentation, that taking a good care and having an eye on your cash flow is very important. Yet, we know for a fact there are business models that can generate cash quickly. And you mentioned that you should be selling in cash. Given the current context and our startups, because most of our startups are software tech startups, how do you suggest they could bootstrap? This is point A. And how do you think they can look at their business model in terms of outsourcing certain business functions in order to better utilize the cash flow and thus have the potential and ability to bootstrap?
Okay, so the two parts to your question. The first part is these are startups that are investing in software and IT, right? And
Yeah.
what's the question?
Yeah. How can tech startups look at their business model and try to maneuver around their business model or pivot on their business model in order to be able to bootstrap as at the very beginning as point A for them to succeed, and as a mitigation if they don't raise rounds or they are not able to raise rounds of funding?
Okay, well, the business model, I mean, different technology companies have different business models. So I think the crux of the issue with a technology startup is how much money do you need to be operational in order to start attracting customers. I've been working on the assumption here that you can bootstrap your way to being operational. Now, some technology startups can't do that because the level of capital investment is just too high. So, you know, if you are in that area where the level of capital investment is too high and you can't find a way to deliver a proof of concept that is going to cost a lot less, then, you know, that's a challenge. I have, for example, one tech startup where the pilot, just to do a pilot, the proof of concept, is $3 million. And so we're having trouble finding investors that want to take that kind of a risk for a pilot. And the pilot is just to make sure it works. Then you need to go operational and try to have revenue. And so I think the business model really depends on the capital investment required for the technology startup. There's no one solution here. Now, how do you mitigate that? Well, you can try to partner with different people like, you know, Microsoft or Google or Amazon, AWS. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of groups out there that can provide you resources. And then you can, you know, you can try to have a technology team that are like founders in the company and they work for free until they get this thing going. That's the only way I would mitigate it. But you have to be careful though. My advice is never give shares to people that you can pay for. Okay, wait and raise the money, but one thing is to have a founding CTO, but another thing is to put together a team of 5 technology people and just give them shares to do a job that you don't have money to pay for. Because investors don't want to see people there that are just there because they received money. They were supposed to receive money.
And that answers probably the second question I asked on how to look at your resources and define which resources can be outsourced, which resources can't be compensated, and which resources to focus on as key employees and carrying with you on your conversation. For that, I'm going to be asking you guys if you have any further questions to Paris, because otherwise we're going to end our session. So please feel free to raise your hands and ask questions. Cool. Then kindly access. Yeah. Then thank you so much, Paris, for an amazing refresher for me and session. It's always good, and I always feel proud and happy to be part of the business school, i.e. Business School, and to be taught by you. Thank you so much for your addition and for always adding value and giving back to any part of the world. That means the world to me, and I probably guess it means the world to other startups. Ooh, see you soon. See you soon in our part of the world.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining today. It's a real pleasure. And yeah, stay in touch. Feel free to connect. I've reached my limit on LinkedIn for connections, but you can follow me there and see the posts that we do and the events and things. yeah, I hope to be in your part of the world very soon. And if not, I'm going to be at Rise Up Egypt at the end of November. And that's a great event for everybody to show up at.
Yeah, that's for sure. And we'll make sure that we plan something for you to bring you here in Jordan and have this physical interaction together, hopefully.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much, Paris.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye.